Good day, everybody. Randy Franklin Smith here. Today, we are doing a deep dive into a very specific area of the Windows security log, and that is analyzing logon attacks. So we will be talking a lot about event ID 4625, which is failed logon, but it's not the only event ID that we'll be discussing. Now, before I go any further, I want to thank Manage Engine, and I've got Nitin Devanand here with me today. And Nitin, if you could just say hello real quick. We want to thank you for making today's real training for free possible. And I'm also looking forward to you showing folks how you can implement some of the recommendations that I'm sharing today with your Log 360 technology. Nitin?
Absolutely, Randy. Thank you so much. And a big warm welcome to the Manage Engine family. So like Randy said, we're going to discuss about few important topics when it comes to event ID 4625 and plus, and we will show you how exactly you can tackle it and get meaningful reports out with Manage Engine.
Awesome. So I'm going to start off with just talking about the type of persistent attack that we see today, because the recommendations that I'm sharing with you are especially targeted at or tailored to helping you detect the behavior of bad guys in the midst of a typical persistent attack. So you'll see what I mean here as we go along. Now, I'm going to have to lay a little bit of background. I'm going to go through those slides, the next couple bullet points here, pretty quickly. That is logon categories and the events in the security log, local accounts versus domain accounts, because the tough thing in Windows is that you have authentication events and you have logon events, and you have local accounts and you have domain accounts. And this complicates and creates a good bit of confusion out there. So as I said, I'll have to go through it today pretty quick, but if you want to go back and get a more detailed primer on the things that I'm discussing in the first couple bullet points here, there's always my free Security Log Secrets course available at the website that you can sign up and take. Okay, it's free. All right, and then we're going to get into what we're really trying to detect. First, we'll just talk about dealing with the problem of innocent logon failures. There's always going to be logon failure events that are just innocent. The user is typing their password or their username in incorrectly. So we'll talk about some tips for recognizing those and filtering them out. And then this one little bullet point really represents the bulk of what we're talking about today and the core of today's topic, and that is recognizing attacks from logon events. All right, so today's persistent attacks, right? The bad guy usually starts off with somebody's workstation, and through a phishing attack or a drive-by download or something like that. On that workstation, the bad guy is usually able to get at least that user's credentials. That's usually pretty simple. And then from there, tries different methods to extend his kill chain into other systems on the network. And so maybe he's able to jump over here to this server and collect additional credentials. And it's not always the password, sometimes it's the hash, right, with pass the hash attacks. And then from that server, he's able to use those credentials or guess other information or lay other traps out there to be able to jump to more systems. And he just goes from system to system, collecting more credentials as he goes along. So what we're interested in doing here is recognizing this activity, because there's no way the bad guy can accomplish this without creating some noise. And in this case, I don't mean noise as in useless events that you want to filter out. I mean the things that go bump in the night, right? A bad guy loose on your network, he's going to create some sounds as he moves around in the form of the events that we're looking for. So that's the context for today. Now, to recognize these attacks and not get distracted or not chase down red herrings and so on, we need to understand the difference between local accounts and domain accounts and how they affect the events that are logged and where the events are logged. Are they logged on the domain controller? Are they logged on the workstation or member server? And we have to understand the two categories of events, authentication and logon events. They sound synonymous, but they're not exactly in the Windows environment. In fact, they have two different categories, right? In Windows audit policy, you have, let's come down here to our advanced audit policy, you have account logon events and you have logon log-off events. And Windows really named it poorly. Account logon really means authentication. So when you see the A in account logon, substitute that in your mind for authentication events. And then logon, log-off are exactly what they say they are. So let's try to get rid of some of the confusion around that. First of all, we'll talk about accounts. Now, there's two kinds of accounts, right? When you walk up to a workstation or a laptop, normally you log on with your domain account. That's what we should be doing. That's why we have Active Directory and so on. But don't forget, every Windows computer out there, except domain controllers, but all workstations, all member servers have a local SAM with local user accounts in it. And that's what we're talking about when I'm referring to local users. So here on that workstation, there's local user accounts, and then the same with member servers, but domain controllers, of course, have only your Active Directory domain accounts. So there you go. Here's your local users that we're talking about on my Windows 10 workstation right here. All right. Likewise, there's multiple types of logon. Now, I'm only showing two here. The user walks up to their workstation and they log on interactively. It's also in Windows called a local logon. Now, local now means that we're just physically local to the keyboard and screen. It doesn't mean that it's a local account or a domain account. It just means that we have logged on here at the local console of that computer. Then, if we map a drive down here to that file server, that's called a network logon. Of course, there's more logon types than that, right? There's remote desktop, there's service account logons, there's batch job logons for scheduled tasks, and so on. Okay, but think about logon types, and think about the fact that I could be logging on to this workstation either with an account here at Active Directory or in my local SAM. And then when I access this file server down here, I could be logging into that file server, like with a drive mapping to a shared folder, either with my same domain account or with another local account on that particular file server. How do you specify whether you're logging on with a local or domain account? Well, right here, for instance, in the latest version of Windows, you don't get that drop-down box anymore of different domains. If you are logging on to a different domain than what the default is, so the default here is the lab domain. If you're logging on to a different domain, you'd have to prefix it with your domain name. Or if you want to log on to the local computer, nowadays you've got to prefix that with your local computer name. In the old days, all of that was specified in a drop-down box, but that's how it is nowadays. Likewise, when you map a network drive, if you want to log on with a local account, you just put the computer name /username. If it's a domain, then either you leave the domain name out, or you, if it's some domain, if it's not, the default domain that these computers belong to, then you'd qualify that, or you could put it in email format too. But this is what allows us then to control whether we're logging on with a local account or domain account. Now, you may be thinking, well, our users don't worry about this. They always log on with their domain account, and that's great. But see, the bad guys are fully aware of local accounts, and they're widely used as an attack vector. Okay. Now let's discuss logon versus authentication. These are separate and distinct. They are related, but they're separate and distinct. So logon occurs on the computer where the account gains access to objects or can run programs. The authentication occurs on the computer that checks the account's credentials. Okay, examples. It could be the same computer for both. So if I come up to our workstation and log on with a local account in that workstation, then the logon and authentication is occurring on the same computer, and therefore the events will be recorded in that one security log on that workstation. Now, in typical legitimate scenarios, the user comes up to their laptop, logs on with their domain account. In that case, they're logging onto their workstation. They're being authenticated by the domain controller. And so the events will be split up. The logon events logged on the workstation, the authentication events on the domain controller. And so we've been talking about authentication versus logon. Here are the categories in the security log. Again, I've shown you this before. Account logon, log off. So this is authentication. This is actual logon events. So your logon, log off events logged wherever the account logs onto the computer. Hey, you know the other big difference between logon events and authentication events is that logon events denote a session. So you have the beginning of the session, you have things that are done during that logon session, and then you have the log off, which ends the logon session. Authentication doesn't have that. Authentication is just one-time events. So when you log on with a domain account, the workstation has the concept that you began the log on and eventually that log on ends when you log off that session. But the domain controller just authenticates you at a point in time. Okay. If you want to track authentication activity of domain accounts, then we need to enable the account logon category on all of our domain controllers, and then we need the security logs of all of our domain controllers. Remember, security logs are not replicated from one domain controller to another. On the other hand, if we want to track the authentication of local accounts, we would enable that same category, but on our member servers and workstations. Now that's true if we want authentication events. Today though, we're not going to be using any of these account logon, aka authentication events at all. But I had to cover this to make sure that you understand the difference between these and why we're concentrating on logon events. You see, account logon events, aka authentication, is useful primarily on domain controllers. And what it's useful for is its value is that it gives you centralized monitoring of all of your domain account usage, of when your domain accounts are authenticated. That is, if we're tracking all our domain controller security logs. Now, you could use it also on workstations to track whenever. It makes it very easy to detect that somebody's using a local account on a workstation or a member server, but we can still do that with logon, log off events. So in general, I'm coming down on the side of saying that account logon events, aka authentication, is primarily something that you just turn on domain controllers, and it gives you a centralized audit trail of whenever domain accounts are used. We don't always know what endpoint the account is used on, depending upon the events, but at least we know when those accounts are used and if there's failed authentication events, and all we have to do is look at the domain controllers. But we're only part of the way done. On our other computers, on our workstations and on our servers, we need to have this category of events turned on, logon, log off events. This is the only way, number one, to see when a user logs off, if we're interested in logon sessions. Also, logon events allow us to link process tracking events and object access events to the logon session. So, this allows us to correlate that Bob logged on, Bob ran Microsoft Word, and then Bob opened up top secret document number 1. And we can tie all those together. Plus, here's the other thing. Log-on, log-off events give us better information on, number 1, the type of logon and the logon failure. So if you're only looking at account logon events on your domain controllers, you can see that Bob logged on somewhere. And depending upon the scenario, you may be able to see, okay, Bob, was at this computer? Maybe, maybe not. But you will not be able to tell, did Bob log on interactively at the local console? Was it remote desktop? Was it a network drive mapping? That information just is not captured by account logon events on the domain controller. We need the logon log-off events category enabled on all the Workstations member servers out there, and we've got to be looking in those logs. Now, let's just go through a couple quick scenarios. This is the normal, legitimate scenario. A user logs on with a domain account. So the user walks up to their workstation, they log on with a domain account. Who does the authentication? The domain controller does. But what types of events are logged? Well, on the workstation, that's where we get the logon event. On the domain controller is where we get the account logon or authentication event. And then when the user accesses a shared folder down here on this file server, without specifying new credentials, so it just uses his existing domain credentials, then we get a logon event down here on the member server as well. Now, what about when a user logs on with a local account? And this might be something that bad guys are doing. Look at that. The logon event and, if you have it turned on, the account logon event are both recorded on the workstation. And then let's say this user accesses something on this file server or attempts to using a local account on that server. Well, again, both types of events, the logon and the authentication events, are logged on the file server. And look at that, nothing's logged on the domain controller. So an attack could be going on and you won't know about it if all you're doing is collecting your domain controller events. So which categories are best for detecting attacks? Well, you definitely want to enable account logon events on your domain controllers, but it's really more useful as an audit trail and as maybe for catching low and slow attacks against domain accounts. But for attack detection, the logon events category is better. And the thing is, though, we need to turn it on all of our computers, all of them. So let's talk about now some events that we can track to detect attacks. First of all, which categories are best? Wait a second. That's where I want to be. Now, here's the first thing that a bad guy might do. I'm going to go back to my attack here. So the bad guy has gained control of an endpoint, and he had, and by when I say that, he succeeded in getting that endpoint to run his code, and there's a whole process for getting that to happen. But right now, the bad guy's code is running under the logon session or with the credentials of the local user of that workstation. Whatever user clicked on the phishing email link or fell for the drive-by download or whatever. Okay, so the first thing that the attacker will want to know is, well, how powerful is this user account? Just think about that. What you want to do essentially is, and of course he would be doing it through APIs or PowerShell commands or whatever, but we would want to know is, oh, okay, if we're logged on as R. Smith, then what groups do we belong to here on this computer, especially if we're logged on with a local account? Oh, wow, look at that. I'm a member of administrators. Great. So we already have privileged access. Or maybe he enumerates the other user accounts on this system, or the groups. Maybe he says, you know what, let's just go to the administrators group on this computer and see who has admin authority to this computer. This is especially common later when he jumps to other computers. As he's looking at them, he'll say, okay, well, on this server right here, let's look in the administrators group. Who's a member of, oh, look at that, R. Smith. I already have captured the password or the hash for R. Smith. Awesome. So we can use that then to have privileged access to this computer. Okay, so the point though is the bad guy has to enumerate either the groups for the local user or take a local group and enumerate the members of that group. And the cool thing is, with the latest versions of Windows, getting back here, we get two new events, 4798 and 4799. And here's what it tells us. A user's local group membership was enumerated. And by the way, this isn't necessarily just a local user. It could be a domain user. But we're saying, what are the local groups this user belongs to? In fact, I'm logged on as an Azure account in this event. Here's an example of it. I'm logged on with my Azure AD account. And what I've done is I'm checking for this user, what are the groups this user is a member of? And we can find out what program was used. In this case, I used MMC. So probably all I did was what I'm going to show you right here. I just went to, let's see, who am I doing this for? Yeah, administrator. So here's what I would have done. I would have gone to the administrator account, brought it up, checked the member, and voila, we just generated event ID 4798. And I know that I did that with computer management, likely because the program name here is MMC, but it could just as well be PowerShell, or it could even be Microsoft Word if the bad guy has succeeded in doing something like reflective DLL injection into a running Microsoft Word process. Now here's the thing. There are programs that check local group membership, and it's legitimate. There's nothing wrong with it. It's legitimate. It's innocent. So one of the things that we always have to do is baseline stuff. And so we've got to baseline our common legitimate producers. And here's just a few that I know of from my Windows 10 workstation. But you would need to repeat this on your environment and see, okay, what are the common process names? I know these are legitimate processes. They're part of Windows. And in my environment, they regularly, or at least occasionally, generate this event. So that we can filter that out then and just concentrate on the 4798s, which are unusual. 4799 is similar, but it's a matter of where we go to a local group and just get this information right here. What are the members of that local group? So these are awesome events that were added in Windows 10 and Windows 2016 that allow us to hear it when a bad guy is going around and looking and trying to find target accounts that he can use. Okay. Now, as we go into looking at failed logons, the first thing that we need to think about is the fact that users routinely fat-finger their password, or there's other reasons why a logon can fail, and it doesn't indicate an attack. Now, here are the most common status codes on event ID 4625. In fact, let's talk about 4625. I'm going to bring up that event in my security log encyclopedia. This is an event of the logon log-off category. And we'll go to 4625. So see, it's right here. It's part of logon log-off. And this is the one event ID that's logged whenever a logon fails for any reason. So 4625 is always a failure event. It's logged on all supported versions of Windows. And the information that we get, here's an example. The subject usually is not interesting. It's usually just what you see right there, because this is the operating system, in this case, doing this. So the first piece of useful information is the logon type. Logon type is explained in a different event ID. Here, let's go to logon type right here, and I reference it over here at 4624. So 4624, here's your logon types. This tells you whether the logon attempt that failed was as a result of the user being at the local keyboard and screen, or maybe they're trying to come in over the network, or maybe they were trying to come into the computer via remote desktop, or maybe a service is configured to run as account X, but the password specified is incorrect. Maybe we've changed the password on the service account but not changed it on that service, just as one example. All right, so these are your logon types, and they're documented on 4624, which is a successful logon. Let's go back to 4625, failed. All right, so there's our logon type. Next piece of information, probably the most fundamental, is the account for which the logon failed. And in this case, I just typed in a bogus username, account name ASDF. So it's going to be easy to know why that failed, but it is specified here under failure information. Failure reason, unknown username or bad password. So what we've got is a status of 6D. Now, what are all of these statuses? And we have a substatus of 6.4. Let's go see what those mean. So 6.4 means username does not exist. So this, see, the text is a little ambiguous. Could be bad username, could be bad password. But if we look at the status codes, and especially the substatus code, 64 tells us it was because the username itself does not exist. So that's what you should use the most, rather than depending upon the English text explanation, go with these codes, and they're documented here on 4625. Now, what other information do we get on this event? We get process information. Usually that's not useful because, again, usually it's just the operating system itself handling this logon process. But the next piece of information can be very useful, and that is if this is a logon attempt coming from a remote client. So we're not at the local keyboard and screen. And this is, we really want to know about these, right? This is where somebody's trying to get into this computer from over the network. Then this information will be filled in. Workstation name, and as long as the network protocol is TCP/IP, we should also see the IP address. You also get the source port. So that's not the destination port on this computer. This is the TCP port that it's coming from on the remote computer. Now, is that useful? Well, it can be useful in forensic situations where you're wondering, why is this computer, Win R9H29 yada yada, trying to get into this computer as ASDF? Who, what program on that computer did that? Well, if you're tracking, like with Windows Firewall, outbound connections, then you could look at the date and time on that computer and the outbound source port, the outbound connections source port for that particular port number, and then trace that back to find out what is the program and the user that initiated that connection from that system. Interesting, huh? Okay, but at least this is nice, is having the workstation name and the source IP address. All right, so we're going to look at ways to use that information. But first of all, we're talking about how do we get rid of innocent logon failures. So when a user enters their username incorrectly, we're going to get 64. What if a user puts in an existing username, but they entered the password incorrectly? That'll be 6A. What if they did that enough times in a row that their account got locked out and they continued to try to log on? That'll be 234. What if they didn't pay attention to password expiration reminders, and so they come in Monday morning, they can't log on because the password's expired? 71. What if their workstation's clock, for whatever reason, is more than 5 minutes out of sync with the domain controller's clock? Then Kerberos will fail, and locally on that computer we'll get a 133. What if the user has called into the help desk, said, I forgot my password? The help desk resets their password. You're probably going to see this when they log on. Okay, so these are all examples that could be innocent. Now, of course, just because the code is one of these doesn't mean it's innocent. I'm just saying that innocent logon failures usually are one of these codes. To help determine if it's really innocent or malicious, you need to think about things like this. For end users, typically the point at which the logon fails is on a logon type 2. So they're trying to log on to their local computer with their domain account. Okay, so that's usually when you see an innocent logon failure. It's going to be logon type 2. The computer in question is an end user's workstation. And let's see. Yeah, that's it. Now, what about admins? Because admins, fat finger their password too. Usually that's going to be one of the first two. Hopefully they're a little bit more on top of things. They're changing their password when it should be, and so on. But here's the big thing. For recognizing innocent logon failures of privileged accounts, of admins, it's really important to understand what are your local procedures. What is your organization's procedures for privileged user account management? The more formalized and controlled that is, the easier it is to distinguish. As an example, let's say that you require administrators to use a SAW, a Secure Administrative Workstation, SAW. All right, so should you see failed logon attempts originating or targeting other systems other than the SAW? Well, no. See, there's a perfect example. So the tighter your controls on privileged accounts are, the easier it is to distinguish innocent logon failures from failed. Because, see, the bad guys typically are not going to be aware of your written policies on privileged user account usage. Bezaleel asks, are these logon events collected from endpoints or from the domain controllers? Okay, remember, let's go back to this slide here. The only thing you get really on your domain controllers are account logon events, and we're not using those at all in today's webinar. We're strictly talking about logon log-off events, and so everything we're talking about today requires that you be collecting events from your workstations and your member servers in addition to just your domain controllers. All right, now, here's the attack scenarios we're going to talk about. We'll talk very briefly about some easy ones. Low sophistication shotgun attacks against administrator, attacks against a renamed admin account. We'll talk about brute force attacks, attempts to identify target accounts, and then finally the most sophisticated are detecting attempts to reuse harvested credentials. So back up here, remember, as the bad guy goes along, he harvests credentials from each system he breaks into by harvesting credential artifacts like password hashes and so on in memory, and then the SAM and saved credentials and so on. So then he's going to try to use those credentials on other systems and make noise as he does that, and that's what we're talking about detecting finally. Now, our simplest is just low sophistication shotgun attacks. These are usually not targeted attacks where somebody has specifically chosen you as a target. They're just, scanning IP addresses on the network, on the internet, and you'll see attempts to log on as administrator, specifically ADMINISTRATOR, because they know that there's an account out there by that name, or there usually is. So again, the more tightly you follow best practices, the easier it becomes to detect attacks. So if you follow this best practice of never logging on as the built-in admin account, except in emergency when all the other accounts are locked out or disabled, then any occurrences of 4625 or any occurrence of 4624 with the word administrator in the event text should be investigated. But that's simple, right? Andrew is asking how you collect logs from end-user workstations. You can either use Windows Event Forwarding or an agent, and Manage Engine that you'll see here in a little bit supports either one. Okay, now let's move on and talk about slightly more sophisticated attacks. So let's say that you're following the first best practice of never logging on as the built-in admin account, but you also rename the admin account. Now, is it hard to discover what you've renamed admin to? No, it's easy, but it's still useful to do that, because now if you see attempts to log on, let's say you rename administrator to Bozo, and you now see attempts to log on as Bozo, then okay, that tells us someone has gone to the trouble of figuring out what we've renamed the admin account to. And so that means that this is less of a shotgun attack and something a little more sophisticated, a little more targeted, a little more effort being put into play. Now let's talk about brute force attacks, where we're just trying every possible password until we come up with one that fits for a given user account. Well, first of all, there's the fast and furious types of attacks, pretty uncommon nowadays. But what you're going to see is event ID 4625 with the 6A status code for a given username, many of those in a short period of time. It might also likely be accompanied by account lockout events, 4740. More common today, if we have a determined persistent attacker, would be a low and slow attack. How do you detect this? Well, first of all, you need a baseline. You need to pick a number of days, like a week, 7 days. You'd want to get a list of all the accounts that have a 4625 6A status code within that time period. So maybe it's Tom, Dick, and Harry. Then we would want the total occurrences of 4625 6A for Tom, for Dick, and for Harry. and then we determine here's what our threshold is going to be for X logon failures because of a bad password within 7 days. That's either going to be, it's certainly going to be above the average for Tom, Dick, and Harry. Maybe we pick, well, who had the most, Tom, Dick, or Harry? Oh, Harry. All right, then let's say our threshold is going to be over that peak. And certainly the threshold, you'd want it to be less than your lockout policy threshold because otherwise, that's going to be triggered. So a low and slow attack is designed not to trip your lockout policy. So therefore, your threshold for detecting low and slow would be, basically, it's more than what you see for a user who's really forgotten their password or is really bad about entering it in every day, but you'd want it to be less than what's going to trip your lockout policy. Otherwise, you're never going to get a low and slow alert. So then what you want to do is alert when you find a given account with a total 4625-6A within X number of days that's greater than your threshold. Now, we already talked about these enumeration events, 4798, 4799. As you get more and more Windows 10 and Windows 2016 systems, you'll want to watch for these events. But remember, baseline the processes that are known to generate these events innocently. Okay, now let's talk about attempts to reuse harvested credentials. And first of all, let's talk about failures. So when you see 4625, how can we get an indication that this is an attempt to reuse a harvested credential? Well, usually well, not usually. If it's because of a bad password or the account is not present, but the username is a privileged account somewhere, okay, we want to watch that a little more carefully. How do we know if the account is privileged? Well, again, the tighter controlled your environment is, the more best practices you follow, the better. So if you have a naming convention that you can wildcard and recognize privileged accounts, then this allows us to watch logon failures because of a bad password for privileged accounts more closely than for end user accounts. Now, someone out there typically says, yeah, but that makes it easier for the bad guys to find privileged accounts. Look, it's very easy to find privileged accounts, okay? That is, you can do that with just read on any user account. Let's put it that way. Any user in the domain, any user on a system can find out which accounts are privileged without any special authority. So the username doesn't give you any special information. That's what, by saying we don't want to use a naming convention for our privileged accounts is basically a security through obscurity control, which is not recognized as a valid control by the information security profession, really. Okay. But here's the other one that is really interesting. And again, the more tightly controlled our environment is, the more hard controls we put in, especially for privileged accounts, then the easier it is to recognize logon attacks against privileged accounts in particular. So what about logon restrictions? If you are following best practices and saying, look, admins can only log on from approved secure admin workstations, then you can put hard controls in place that actually require that. You can do that with password silos, you can do that with workstation restrictions, and you can do it with logon rights. And so now, your typical bad guy is not going to be aware of those and won't and let's say he doesn't have control of your secure admin workstation. So he tries, see, here's an example right here. We have a privileged user account. When it logs on to a approved secure admin workstation, it's going to succeed. That's 4624. But if a bad guy has gotten control of that privileged user account, he's going to use that to potentially log on to any other computer out there. And if we have hard controls in place, whether with logon rights, workstation restrictions, or authentication policy silos, then that logon is going to fail with a 4625, and the failure code will either be 15B or 70 hex, of course, right? Specified right here. And that's what we're looking for. So the best thing you could do, if you have the combination of a naming convention for privileged accounts and you're using authentication policy silos or workstation restrictions or user right assignments to limit where privileged accounts can log on, then all we have to do is look for 4625, static code 15B or 70, where the username matches our privileged naming convention wildcard, and bam, we've got some good stuff to investigate. That either means somebody has forgotten the policy or we have a bad guy. Ali says, if we don't have a security tool or log aggregator, what tools could be utilized to review and filter these events for investigation? Look, Ali, there is no way that you can be compliant. There's no way that you can keep up and monitor logs if you don't have some type of log management or SIM solution. And you're going to see a nice one today with Log 360. I mean, that's just the truth. Neil asks, what audit policy is needed for 47, 98, and 99? Just going back to that real quick, Neil, you need, I specified it here in the in these slides. So 4798 depends on the user account management category, 4799 on security group management category being turned on. And Neil, hey, for any of these events, just go to my security log encyclopedia, and we always specify up here in the header what categories cause that event to be logged that need to be enabled. That's at ultimatewindowssecurity.com. Okay. Now let's talk about attempts to reuse harvested credentials where, heaven forbid, the bad guy succeeds. Is there any way to detect that? Because think about it, it's not going to log, it's not going to produce a logon failure that looks suspicious automatically. It's just going to be a successful logon. So this is the most sophisticated. This requires what I call a rolling baseline, is usually the only practical way to keep up with this. And it's a matter of detecting new combinations of a privileged user, or, hey, even better yet, all users, end users, and then new combinations of that and the computers where they log on. So here I've got a baseline for user one. These are the known computers where we've seen user one successfully log on before. And every time we see user one log on to a computer where he's never been seen before, we pop that in as a, probably low value event to check, but then we add it to the baseline so that we don't get that going forward. So you only get one chance. The first time somebody logged on to a new computer, bing, little blip on the radar for you to check into. And depending, again, on your environment, there may be additional things that you can track. Like if you know that it's a privileged account and the computer name, your computer names also have naming conventions, you might be able to immediately say, hey, a user fitting this naming convention should never be logging on to a computer fitting this naming convention. So we've got a failure in our policy somewhere. Likewise, you can keep track of known client and target systems. So this workstation, after a certain amount of time, a pattern is going to develop of which servers in a larger environment this computer connects to. And so if we keep a baseline for these, then by just looking at our 4624 events, we can keep this rolling baseline and pop it up on a dashboard, and you just make a best effort to follow up on these. Now, this does require significant correlation capability because you're comparing a new event against historical events. And the baseline needs to be dynamic. Otherwise, you're going to get, otherwise you're going to have to maintain the baseline. Okay, so bottom line, catching logon attacks requires, number one, that you collect events from every system out there. Number two, it's going to require some baselining, and for the sophisticated stuff, a dynamic baseline. Number three, of course, you need automated monitoring and alerting. There's no way that you're going to be able to do this on your own by looking at Event Viewer. And once we see something that really catches our eye, we need the ability to do some ad hoc analysis and querying. Well, let's see how you can do all this with Manage Engine. I'm going to turn things over to you, Nitin. And folks, keep those questions coming in. I'm going to start answering some of them right now by typing, but please give us your questions for Log 362 as Nitin proceeds.
Great, thank you so much, Randy. So again, so we've seen a lot of events right now. So a few questions which even I was looking at the question scenarios where how you can actually, start analyzing these events when you have more than, let's say, 100 to 1,000 missions. Now, getting all these events from each and every mission is going to be very tedious for you. You agree, right? So for one mission, you can get logs, you can analyze. Say with the second mission, you can forward it. But again, over a period of time, it's going to be really tedious for you to sit and analyze each and every log. So we're going to see how you can capture all these logs together, put it in one central location, and start analyzing it. So we at Manage Engine, we focus on one simple solution is to make sure that you have all the required tools to make sure your IT auditing, be it your Active Directory or your service management, your network security, everything is easy, and you can actually, literally you can just go today, on your normal work day, get all the reports that you want to right on the table. So Manage Engine, we offer close to 90 plus products, and it's absolutely a combination of free tools too for your real-time IT management. And of course, I'm sure some of you might have heard about Manage Engine. So we have close to 3 million IT users out there who use the product today and are completely satisfied with how we produce results. So what we're going to look today is a Log 360. So as the name suggests, this is going to focus exclusively on each and every application, networking device, your servers, your workstations, every single device in your network. The product is going to collect the logs so you can do an in-depth analysis. You can get a real-time, even correlation. You can store all these logs for further analysis and get meaningful reports. Now, all the event IDs which we saw today, be it 4625 or 4624, every single event will be registered on all the missions across, right? So it's really important for you to capture each and every log that is coming out and store it in one single location. So what we're going to do today is to see how Log 360 can help you in this. So I'm going to quickly show you how the product will look like in real so you'll have an understanding. So this is a simple exe file which you can download from our website, and you can install it on any Windows box. So the product is intelligent enough to identify your domain and your missions inside. So the minute you install, it will automatically discover your missions, and then it would start collecting logs instantly. So this is going to be one of the top tools when it comes to AD auditing. Audit all your Active Directory requirements, so be it logon failures, your success, and also the changes made on your Active Directory, your group policy change, any changes which you have done or which somebody is doing on your AD, that can be captured and you can get real-time alerts on the thing. So what I'm going to do here is, let me just try to log into So a combination of multiple components together will give you a complete overview on your entire network. So as the name suggests here again, so we have two components. One is the AD Audit Plus, which is going to focus on your Active Directory, and another one is an Event Log Analyzer, which is going to focus on all the other things apart from Windows. So let's quickly look into the reports available with AD, because we've been discussing a lot about the 462.5 events and the logon failures, and like Randy informed, it's pretty difficult to identify between the real attack and not a real one. So here we have a quick report. For example, if you just take a look at here, this is a simple report, but it still gives you information on which user, the client IP, the host name, and which domain controller is being authenticating, the timestamp, and also the reason for that. And one of the biggest advantages with Managed Engines Log360 is it has a built-in analyzer, which will automatically analyze if these credentials are provided anywhere, because at times what happens, you can provide the credential on the service or let's say your map drive anywhere, and that over the period of time becomes a stale account, and then it keeps giving you multiple failures. So the product can give you a real-time analysis if that credentials is provided anywhere. And as you all know, one of the most common attacks is coming from the inside, from inside the organization. So we have multiple reports here, to make sure that you get an idea which users are not logging in and who are logging in too. So for example, if you look at here, one simple report which tells you like one single user, he's been trying to log into multiple missions, as you can see here. And the product can give you the exact timestamp and how many missions he's been trying to log in with the client IP address and the host name too. Now, for all these events to be registered, you will know that we have to enable the audit policy by default, right? So the product is, again, capable of applying these audit policies automatically, as you can see here. So you don't have to sit and enable the audit policy at each and every domain controller, your workstations, or your member servers. The product will do it for you automatically. And in real time, it's going to collect each and every event available and store it. So like Randy said, the security log will not replicate between each domain controller. So it's a must that you collect all and put it on one location, because over the period of time, the logs might be overwritten, so you have to have the data here. So another scenario which I'm going to show you is from the Event Log Analyzer. Now we saw that the event 462.5, that's causing a lot of issues here. Now, Event Log Analyzer focuses not just on Windows, but the entire logs coming from your whole network. So for example, we have a very powerful search engine which is built in on the product itself. So all I can do here is, simply pick the missions I want to, and here I can basically type in anything I want. So be it a username or an event ID, anything. So for example, let's focus on the event number 462.5, all right? And if I just hit go, I'm going to get the data for that specific event ID, and I can specify the time frame too. So I'm just doing it for today. I can do it for the last 7 days, 30 days, or I can customize according to my requirement. So once I get the data here, I can easily find out the information which I've been looking for. So we saw the status code, right, and the sub-status code. So that information is available right here. So from here, again, you can start filtering more. So what I can do is I can simply copy this, and I can add an extra filter here. Let's say I need 465, and the message should contain the specific status code. There you go. It's been filtered again. So you can literally, start filtering each and every category according to your requirement, and you can add multiple fields here. Take, for example, you want to know the logon type. You can add it here. All right, and that's going to reflect right down here. So this is a logon type 3. So according to your requirement, you can filter each and every category, and then you can either save the search to create a custom report, or what I would suggest is save it as an alert. So once you click as an alert, the entire search criteria which you've given will turn into an alert profile. So here we have another big advantage is to provide a threshold. So you can easily mention, let's say, like 5 times that specific event is occurring. I'm just giving an example, right? So according to, let's say, 10 minutes or 15, according to your requirement, your environment, you can choose it, and then that would send out an email or an SMS right out of the box. So all it took was just a few seconds for me to create that, and that's going to send out an email instantly. Now, this is just one simple example. So here, you can type in any event number, all right? You can type a combination of event, or you want to do multiple usernames. Again, that is also possible. So let's say I'm going to do like, I can specify which username I want, or let's say I want to do like this. And I don't want all the computers, so we will ignore all the computers here. There you go. So it hardly took a few seconds for us to generate that report, right? Now, another big advantage of, Log360 is to correlate all these events. Now, we saw earlier that multiple events, you can view it under the event viewer, or even from the reports with Log360, you can view individual event IDs. But when it comes to correlating both events and getting a single result, again, that can be tough. So for that, we have a built-in correlation engine with the product itself. So this, again, correlates not just one, multiple events together to give you a single answer. So we have built-in rules here, and we also give you an option to create your own rule. So for example, I can choose, let's say, failed logon, okay? I can give a threshold here, all right? And I can add any field according to what I want. So I can add, let's say, an account created, for example. So according to my requirement, I can choose from these whitelist category here and create a custom correlation such that one or two or three events happening together within a little span of time, that should trigger an email alert to me instantly. That is absolutely possible. Now with all this information, everything is stored in one single database for us. So even if your event viewer logs gets overwritten, that's not a problem because you have all the information stored with the product itself. So even 5 or 6 years down the lane, you want to know what happened today, you can easily generate a report from the archive files. Now, another interesting thing which I want to tell you is we saw how all the Windows functions pretty easily. That's going to show up all the events, and we can generate reports on that. But let's talk something apart from Windows. So let's say you have again a bad guy, an attack happening, right? So let's focus on other networking device. So you have your, let's say, your VPN, or let's say your networking device, any networking device, your router, your switch, anything. So each and every log can be captured using Log360. So all you have to do is configure your device to send out the logs as a syslog packet. So we have a real-time syslog viewer which will constantly listen for any incoming packets across your entire network. So as soon as the packets are received from any networking device, the product will start logging it on the database itself. I can give you a very simple example here how we are going to showcase something from a VPN log. So let me go back here so you'll have an understanding. So here, an external attack is trying, to log into your network. So he creates multiple VPN logons, and then he gets a successful logon followed by an IP. So literally what it means, he's bypassing your VPN and the firewall and trying to get it into your network, and then he tries many things. Try to install software or does any changes to your network, then that can be audited too. So this example exactly can be achieved again with Log360. So if I have to go here, all right, again under the same correlation, we have a built-in structure for that. So if you click on the suspicion software installation, so I've done for the last 30 days, I have one. So if you look at here, there you go. So one user, he's been trying to bypass my firewall and get into through the VPN. All right, so multiple times failure, and then it's followed by one single success. And then you can easily find out the IP address assigned and what exactly he has done on the mission. So he has installed a software there. So this flow, can be achieved using the correlation which we have. And all this, you can either create it, like I said, on your own. So we have like multiple rules here. All right. So it's just not for Windows, like I said. You can find out if there's any service installed, or even if you take your Unix missions, there you go. You have repeated sudo commands field. Again, these are the potential risks which we found from our customers, and we created a built-in rule for them so that all they have to come back here, just click on the alert so that an alert profile will be triggered for that. So to sum it up, I would really say that all the event IDs from Windows plus your networking device and even your SQL, your SQL logs, any web server logs you have, all the logs can be brought together in one single centralized location here, and the product can help you in analyzing each and every log out there, and you can get meaningful reports, you can get email alerts on the same, and it's going to be really simple for you to analyze the attacks happening within your network as well as from outside. Do you have any questions? We can go ahead.
Yeah, we sure do. And folks, keep your questions coming in. Dan would like to know, how does Log360 compare with Manage Engine's other log-to-event log analyzer?
Well, again, Log360, like I said, it's like a combination of two. So you have the event log analyzer built in with the AD Autoplus. That's another Active Directory tool. So event log analyzer as such is a separate component. So we can actually make it together. So we can bring event log analyzer plus the AD Autoplus together in one single console. That is the Log360 for you. Both the functionality remains same, but we're giving you an extra, a component extra so that you can actually view both your Active Directory plus the entire security-related issues in one single console.
Got it. Sebastian says, I am only collecting logs from Active Directory. Can I use 4768 and 4771 to detect brute force logins? Sebastian, yes, but only for domain accounts. You will be completely blind to any attacks against local accounts on member servers and workstations. And the bad guys use that a lot. And even if you say, okay, well, we don't have local accounts on those systems, a couple things. First of all, there's always the administrator account, but you could lock that down. Regardless, you still want to monitor because the bad guy is going to create that kind of noise that end users do not create. In a typical environment, you don't see logon success or failures for local accounts out there on those systems, but you'll always see it when there's a bad guy loose. And so that's why I think it's a, an irreplaceable part of attack monitoring. Okay, Matt says, is this option like Log360 reasonable for really small networks? So do you have Log360 or Event Log Analyzer environments that are small, like a couple hundred systems or less?
Absolutely, absolutely. The number doesn't matter. So even if you have 10 or 15 or even like 1,000, still the product will work absolutely fine.
Okay. Well, let's see here. Siddharth asks, won't there be performance issues if I start collecting events from all my workstations in my network and not just the account login events from my domain controllers? Okay, you're never going to feel it on your workstation, whether you're using native Windows event forwarding or an agent. You're never going to feel it on the workstation. Your network should be able to handle it just fine. Now, where you're sending the events, you're going to have a properly sized log management or SIM solution. That goes without saying, but it's not insurmountable. Ming would like to find out how to get cost. Ming is a small business with 2 domain controllers, 3 servers, 20 workstations. Where could she get costing on Log360?
Perfect. So, you see that email address to the Log360-support. So I would suggest just drop an email with your specifications, like how many domain controllers and, missions you have. And I'm sure that our team can send us the pricing right over.
Matt would like to know where the log's stored. How do you store the logs in Log360?
Well, by default, when you install the product, it comes built in with the PostgreSQL database as a backend, which is always customizable. So in case if you have a SQL running, you can change the database from Postgres to SQL as well. So all the logs collected would be stored on that database itself.
Okay, Nand is asking, will Log360 analyze file integrity monitoring? Do you have file integrity monitoring?
All right, so yes, the product does support file integrity monitoring, and we can actually collect the logs not just from the Windows file server, but also from any workstation across. So we can have an agent install, specifically mention which folders to be monitored, and then you can create customized reports as well as alerts.
All right. David goes to the opposite end of scalability. He says, what about 12,000 hosts? Can you scale to an environment of that size?
Absolutely. So we do have customers with that as well. So yes, we can.
And another person, Manjushri, says, how many clients and devices can be integrated on Log360? So what are some of your largest environments, Nitin?
All right. So we have customers, ranging more than like 30 to 40 domain controllers at a stretch, and that's personally I've seen. Plus we have like 10,000 member servers, and plus again, I'm just giving you, like a random number there, but yes, we do have a large environment customers there. And the product is capable of handling large amount because the processors, the engines which is built in on the product is pretty powerful to handle incoming logs.
Okay, great. All right, well, here's another question. Bezalel would ask, instead of installing an agent on endpoints, can this be set up as a pull method from a central collector?
Well, yeah, it is possible. You can have, let's say you have 10 missions. You don't want to get it from all the 10. You can have one single agent installed to collect the logs from all the rest and then forward it. Yes, that is also possible.
Cool. And another thing I'm sure you can support is Windows event forwarding. That's built into Windows. You can have thousands of computers send their events to one system and then probably install an agent there too, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Yep.
Mike asks, what happens if the machine is offline and cannot forward? So is it going to catch up later?
Absolutely. So once the machine is up and running, automatically the product, because we have like a timestamp between the event logs, so automatically it will start over from where it left.
Awesome. Well, this has been a good demo, and I hope that my information was also valuable to you folks. We've made a recording of this, so we'll send you a link to the recording if you want to watch it again or share it with colleagues, and you'll see that in a follow-up email. We really appreciate everybody's time today, and hey, we got another question for you. How does it work with standalone endpoints versus domain joined endpoints? So I would expand that question just to say, can you get events from non-domain computers, and can you do some kind of automatic discovery of new endpoints that come into the domain and automatically start getting events from them, Nitin?
Absolutely. So this is not just restricted only to the domain missions. Even you have a work group standalone, yes, we can get the logs from that as well. So either an agent can be installed, it can be simply installed on that. That will just require a few ports to be open, and that will collect the logs and forward it.
All right, super. Okay, well, I think that is all the questions at this point. Nitin, thank you so much for making today's real training for free possible.
Thank you so much, Randy.
All right, folks, have a great day, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye-bye for now.